The aim of the refraction lab is to find the refractive index of perspex. The equipment we used was a ray box with a voltage of 12, single slit, and a semicircular perspex block. Set up apparatus as per diagram, using the single slit to produce one ray of light. Trace around the semicircular glass block and be careful to draw on the normal exactly halfway along the top. Take 10 sets of readings for angle of incidence, I, and angle of refraction, R. For which the angle of refraction is a right angle when light passes from a more optically dense to a less optically dense medium. At reading 1, we had the ray box at such an angle to the semicircular glass block to produce an 18-degree angle of incidence and an 11-degree angle of refraction. At reading 2, we had a 28-degree angle of incidence and a 19-degree angle of refraction. At reading 3, we had a 48-degree angle of incidence and a 29-degree angle of refraction. At reading 4, we had a 71-degree angle of incidence and a 38-degree angle of refraction. At reading 5, we had an 80-degree angle of incidence and a 41-degree angle of refraction. At reading 6, we had a 15-degree angle of incidence and an 8-degree angle of refraction. At reading 7, we had a 28-degree angle of incidence and a 19-degree angle of refraction. At reading 8, we had an angle of incidence of 44 degrees and an angle of refraction of 26 degrees. At reading 9, we had an angle of incidence of 60 degrees and an angle of refraction of 34 degrees. At reading 10, we had an angle of incidence of 75 degrees and an angle of refraction of 39 degrees. Finally, we used this completed diagram of all our rays to measure, using a protractor, the angle of incidence and refraction. From this data, we found the sign of angle of incidence and the sign of angle of refraction. Record your data in a table with I, R, sine I, and sine R. Graph sine I against sine R. Sine I should appear on the vertical axis. The feature of the graph that gives you the refractive index of perspex is the slope, or 1.488. According to our results, the refractive index of perspex is 1.4882. However, the actual refractive index of perspex is 1.495, giving us a 0.45% error, which is very good. A few possible sources of error for this lab could have been we didn't accurately mark our rays or didn't accurately measure the angles of refraction or angles of incidence, which would affect our values for sine I and sine R, thus would lead to an inaccurate slope for our graph and an inaccurate value for the refractive index of perspex.